Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Essential GovCon Brief presented by Gordon Reese's Government Contracts Practice Group. I'm Patrick Burns.
And I'm Gloria Cannon. Thanks for joining us as we discuss some of the most important developments affecting government contractors over the past month.
This month, we're focusing on two major developments that could have a meaningful impact on contractors across the federal marketplace. First, we'll discuss the Trump administration's new executive order promoting efficiency and accountability in government contracting, which signals a major shift towards fixed price contracting. And then we'll turn to an important federal circuit decision clarifying the legal standard applicable to CICA stay, overrides, and bid protests.
There's a lot to unpack this month, especially because both developments affect risk allocation and contractor strategy in very practical ways.
Let's start with the executive order issued a few weeks ago on April 30th, titled Promoting Efficiency, Accountability, and Performance in Federal Contracting. So this order represents one of the most significant procurement policy shifts we've seen in a few years. And at its core, the administration is directing agencies to move aggressively towards fixed price and performance-based contracting and away from cost reimbursement and other flexible contract structures.
And it's not just aspirational language. The order includes implementation deadlines, training requirements, and directives aimed at changing agency behavior almost immediately. One of the most important points is that the administration is instructing agencies to use FAR deviations to the maximum extent practicable, while formal FAR revisions are still being developed. So contractors should not assume these changes are years away.
Exactly. The administration clearly wants agencies acting immediately. The executive order establishes fixed price contracting as a preferred procurement model government-wide. So agencies that want to use cost reimbursement, time and materials, labor hour, or other non-fixed price structures are going to face heightened approval and documentation requirements. And the order specifically directs agencies to review the federal government's largest non-fixed price contracts and determine whether those agreements can be restructured or renegotiated to align with the administration's new policy directives.
And that could have substantial implications for contractors operating large defense, technology, logistics, and professional services programs where cost-type contracts have historically been common because of evolving requirements or performance uncertainty. Many contractors rely on those structures precisely because the work is complex, developmental, or difficult to price accurately at the outset.
The executive order also sets a few tight deadlines. So within 45 days of the executive order's issuance, the Office of Management and Budget must issue government-wide guidance. Then within 120 days of the order's issuance, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, working with FAR Council, must propose regulatory amendments to incorporate this fixed price preference.
And while those FAR changes will take time, the order instructs agencies to immediately use FAR deviations to the maximum extent practicable to implement the policy right away. So federal contractors may see these changes appearing in solicitations this summer.
That's exactly right. And the practical effect here is that more performance and pricing risk may shift to contractors. We may start to see agencies pushing for firmer pricing, stronger performance incentives, and more aggressive risk transfer provisions in solicitations and negotiations.
Another important aspect of the order is the training component. The Office of Federal Procurement Policy, the Defense Acquisition University, and the Federal Acquisition Institute are all being directed to develop mandatory training focused on forming and managing fixed price contracts. That tells us the administration views this as a long-term cultural shift within the acquisition workforce, not simply a temporary initiative.
So contractors should certainly be preparing now for this change. And this is a good time for companies to evaluate their contract portfolios, assess which programs may be vulnerable to restructuring efforts, and revisit some pricing assumptions and risk allocation strategies. So contractors should also pay close attention to upcoming FAR deviations and agency guidance, because implementation could vary from agency to agency.
Patrick, one thing I think contractors should keep in mind as well is that even if this policy shift creates challenges, agencies still need realistic procurement structures. There are certain programs where purely fixed price contracting may not be practical. So I think we're likely to see significant discussion over the next year regarding where exceptions remain appropriate and how agencies balance flexibility with the administration's efficiency goals.
I agree with that completely. And I suspect we'll also see increased disputes over scope changes, equitable adjustments, and performance expectations as more risk shifts downstream to contractors.
Let's turn to our second topic. The Federal Circuit issued an important bid protest decision in April called Life Sciences Logistics versus United States. The case addresses a very important procedural issue involving the Competition and Contracting Act, or CICA, stay overrides.
And for contractors who regularly participate in bid protests, this decision could have significant practical implications. So, as many listeners know, when a contractor files a timely GAO protest, CICA generally imposes an automatic stay, preventing contract award or continued performance while the protest is pending. But agencies can override that stay if they determine that either that urgent and compelling circumstances exist or that performance is otherwise in the best interest of the government.
In life science logistics, the incumbent contractor protested the award of a strategic national stockpile contract, and the General Services Administration overrode the automatic stay. The contractor then challenged that override decision at the Court of Federal Claims, and the government argued that in addition to showing the override was arbitrary and capricious, the protester also had to satisfy the traditional four-factor injunction test, things like irreparable harm and likelihood of success in the merits.
But the Federal Circuit rejected that argument. The court held that a contractor challenging a CICA override only needs to demonstrate that the override decision itself was arbitrary and capricious under the Administrative Procedures Act. So, in other words, that the protester needs to show the agency's action lacked a rational basis and does not separately need to satisfy the traditional equitable factors applicable to injunctions.
That's a big deal. The traditional injunction test, irreparable harm, likelihood of success, equities, and public interest, is difficult to meet. The court held that applying that test to override challenges would effectively undermine the statutory design of CICA, which gives protesters the automatic stay simply by filing. The court emphasized that Congress intentionally created an automatic statutory stay triggered simply by filing a timely protest. Requiring protesters to separately prove irreparable harm or likelihood of success would improperly add requirements that Congress never included in the statute.
While the decision does not necessarily create a new standard, it does resolve uncertainty that had existed in some prior cases regarding whether protesters also needed to satisfy the traditional injunction framework. So the ruling provides clear guidance for both agencies and contractors navigating override disputes moving forward.
So those are the major developments we're watching this month. The administration's significant push toward fixed price contracting and the Federal Circuit's important clarification regarding CICA stay overrides.
As always, these developments are likely to continue evolving over the coming months, particularly as agencies begin implementing the executive order through FAR deviations and additional guidance.
We'll continue tracking those developments and discussing what they mean for contractors across the federal marketplace.
Thanks again for joining us for this edition of the Essential GovCon Brief. If you have questions about these developments or other government contract issues, feel free to contact us.
And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or YouTube so you can stay current on the latest government contracts developments.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next month.